The Virginia morning broke cold and bitter, the kind that seeped through your coat and settled in your bones. Marcus Webb stood at the edge of the shooting range at Fort Bennet, watching the American recruits laugh and joke as they prepared for the annual Inter-Allied marksmanship competition. At 42, with graying temples and a weathered face that spoke of too many deployments, Marcus had seen enough to know when he was being sized up and found wanting. He had arrived 3 days earlier as part of a British military exchange program, one of those bureaucratic exercises meant to strengthen Allied bonds. The Americans had been polite enough at first, but that politeness had curdled into something else when they saw what he brought to the competition. No high-tech rifle case. No custom-built weapon with all the modern bells and whistles. Just an old Lee Enfield rifle that looked like it belonged in a museum, and a battered duffel bag that clinked when he set it down. Lieutenant Derek Thornton, the base's golden boy, had taken one look at Marcus's equipment and smirked. 28 years old, sharp-featured, and arrogant in the way only the naturally talented can be, Thornton commanded respect from every soldier on base. He was the 3-time champion of this competition, and he wasn't about to let some washed-up Brit with antique equipment steal his thunder. "That's my grandfather's rifle," Marcus had explained quietly when Thornton first questioned it. "Carried it through North Africa in World War II. Thornton had laughed, a sound picked up by his crew of admirers. "World War II? Jesus, Webb. This is 2024, not 1944. Maybe you should be in a reenactment group instead of a real competition." The other American shooters had joined in the laughter. Even Captain Sarah Morrison, who ran the exchange program, had looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Marcus had simply nodded and walked away, his jaw tight but his face expressionless. He had learned long ago that some battles were not worth fighting with words. The competition rules were straightforward. 7 targets at varying distances, from 300 to 1,200 yards. Each shooter had 1 hour to neutralize all 7. Wind conditions would change. Light would shift. The pressure would mount. It was designed to simulate real combat conditions, where nothing ever went according to plan and adaptability meant the difference between life and death. What made this year different was the innovation Thornton had introduced. He had convinced the base commander to allow shooters to bring their own stabilization systems. Thornton arrived with a state-of-the-art hydraulic rest that cost more than some cars, complete with computer-assisted wind reading and automatic elevation adjustment. Marcus had apple crates. He had found them behind the base commissary 2 days ago, weathered wooden crates that still smelled faintly of fruit. He had stacked them carefully, testing their stability, adjusting their height. When other soldiers saw him working, they had stopped to stare. Some had taken photos. By evening, the whole base was talking about the crazy Brit who thought he could compete against modern technology with garbage he had pulled from a dumpster. The jokes had been relentless. "Hey Webb, you planning to sell apples after you lose? Maybe you should stack them higher. Give yourself something to hide behind when you embarrass yourself." Thornton had been the worst, making a show of inspecting Marcus's setup with exaggerated concern. "You know they have actual shooting benches here, right? This isn't some third-world outpost." Marcus had taken it all in silence. He had reinforced the crates with careful precision, binding them together in a way that absorbed recoil and provided exactly the height and angle he needed. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't high-tech. But it was solid, and it was his. Now, as dawn broke over the range, 20 shooters assembled for the competition. Media had shown up, local news crews eager to cover the event. The base commander, Colonel Patricia Hayes, gave a brief speech about Allied cooperation and military excellence. Marcus barely heard it. His focus was already narrowing, his mind entering that quiet space where the world fell away and only the shot mattered. The shooting order was determined by lottery. Thornton drew number 1, ensuring maximum attention. He would set the standard everyone else would chase. Marcus drew number 17, near the end, ensuring that everyone would already know what time they needed to beat. As Thornton stepped up to his position, his hydraulic rest gleaming in the morning sun, the crowd fell silent. The lieutenant settled behind his rifle with practiced ease, his every movement suggesting absolute confidence. This was his domain, his moment of glory. And somewhere behind him, sitting on a stack of apple crates with an old rifle across his knees, Marcus Webb waited for his turn to remind them all what real skill looked like. Thornton's performance was flawless. Each shot rang out with mechanical precision, his hydraulic rest adjusting smoothly between targets. The crowd watched in awe as he neutralized all 7 targets in 43 minutes, a new personal record. When he stood up, removing his ear protection with a theatrical flourish, the applause was thunderous. He walked past Marcus on his way back, stopping just long enough to lean in close. 43 minutes, Webb. Think your apple crates can beat that? Marcus said nothing. He watched as shooter after shooter took their turn. Some came close to Thornton's time. Most fell short. By the time they reached number 12, the pattern was clear. Thornton would win. The only question was by how much. During the lunch break, Marcus sat alone at a picnic table, cleaning his rifle with methodical care. He could feel eyes on him, hear the whispered conversations. The British guy with the crates, the old man with the museum piece, the fool who thought history could compete with technology. Captain Morrison approached, her expression sympathetic but firm. Webb, listen. Nobody expects you to win here. This is Thornton's range, his competition. Maybe just take your shots, make a decent showing, and we call it a learning experience. Marcus looked up at her, his blue eyes steady. With respect, ma'am, I didn't come here for a learning experience. She sighed. Your pride isn't worth the humiliation. That equipment of yours, it's admirable in its own way, but this is a different world now. Sometimes we have to accept that the old ways don't work anymore. Morrison walked away, shaking her head. Marcus returned to his rifle, running the cleaning rod through the barrel with practice strokes. His hands were steady, but inside, something burned. Not anger exactly, something colder, more focused. By the time they called number 17, the crowd had thinned. Some had left for afternoon duties. Others had lost interest now that Thornton's victory seemed assured. The remaining spectators watched with the mild curiosity of people waiting for an inevitable disappointment. Marcus carried his rifle to the firing line and set it carefully on his stack of apple crates. The wood creaked slightly under the weight, drawing a few chuckles from the observers. He ignored them, settling into position with the kind of stillness that comes only from years of practice. Thornton stood nearby with his crew, arms crossed, a satisfied smile on his face. He had already started mentally composing his victory speech. The range officer stepped forward. Shooter ready? Marcus chambered around, the bolt action of the old Lee Enfield sliding home with a solid click that echoed across the range. He pressed his cheek against the stock, his breathing slowing, his heartbeat steadying. Ready, he said quietly. The timer started. The first target waited at 300 yards, and Marcus Webb, dismissed and underestimated, began to show them exactly what 70 years of British military tradition looked like in the hands of someone who knew how to use it. The first shot cracked across the range. 300 yards. The target's center mass erupted in a puff of white paint. Neutralized. Marcus worked the bolt, the brass casing ejecting in a smooth arc. He shifted his position microscopically, the apple crates holding firm beneath him. Second shot. 450 yards. Another hit, dead center. The crowd's chatter began to fade. Third shot. 600 yards with a crosswind that had troubled several earlier shooters. Marcus adjusted without hesitation, his calculations pure instinct born from decades of experience. The rifle barked. The target fell. 11 minutes elapsed. Thornton's smile faltered. That's luck, he muttered to the soldier beside him. Wind probably shifted in his favor. But the fourth shot proved otherwise. 750 yards uphill, into a gusting wind that had defeated 2 previous competitors entirely. Marcus waited, feeling the air, reading the grass movement, sensing the subtle shifts that no computer could quantify. He squeezed the trigger. The target dropped. Holy shit, someone whispered. The crowd that had drifted away began returning. Word spread across the base with the speed of wildfire. The Brit on the apple crates was actually doing it. Soldiers emerged from buildings, abandoning their afternoon duties. Even Colonel Hayes returned to the observation deck, binoculars raised. Fifth target. 900 yards. Marcus's breathing was a metronome, steady and unhurried. The Lee Enfield kicked against his shoulder like an old friend. The target fell. 26 minutes. Morrison stood frozen, her earlier words about humiliation echoing in her own mind. Thornton's jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful. Sixth target. 1,050 yards. The distance where modern optics and computer assistance gave their greatest advantage. Where Thornton's expensive equipment had shined brightest. Marcus adjusted his position on the crates, the wood creaking but holding. He could feel every eye on the range boring into his back. If you're watching this and rooting for the underdog, take a second to subscribe to the channel. Because what happens next nobody saw coming. Marcus chambered another round. The world narrowed to the target, the wind, the trigger. Everything else fell away. The doubts, the mockery, the dismissive laughter. None of it mattered. Only the shot mattered. He fired. The target fell. The crowd erupted. Actual cheers this time. Not polite applause but genuine amazement. 34 minutes. 6 targets down. 1 remaining. The 7th target sat at 1,200 yards, the maximum distance, positioned on a ridge where the wind was most unpredictable. Thornton had taken 7 attempts to hit it. Most shooters needed 5 or 6. It was the great equalizer, the shot that separated the good from the exceptional. Marcus rose slightly, stretching his back. The apple crates had served him perfectly, absorbing recoil, providing stability, doing everything the expensive hydraulic rest had done. For free, with dignity, with history, he settled back into position. 1 shot remaining, 36 minutes on the clock, and an entire base holding its breath. 1,200 yards. The distance seemed impossible, a gap that swallowed light and made even the best shooters second-guess themselves. Through his scope, Marcus could barely make out the target, a dark silhouette shimmering in the heat waves rising from the Virginia soil. He closed his eyes for a moment, and suddenly he wasn't at Fort Bennet anymore. He was in Helmand Province, 2009, with dust in his mouth and sweat stinging his eyes. He was in the Falklands before that and Kosovo before that. Every impossible shot he had ever taken, every moment when failure meant death, came rushing back. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. The rifle doesn't miss, boy. You do. Trust your training. Trust yourself. Marcus opened his eyes. The wind had shifted, coming now from the northeast at approximately 8 miles per hour, gusting to 12. The temperature had risen 3 degrees since his first shot, affecting the bullet's trajectory. His grandfather's Lee Enfield had no computer to calculate these variables. It had only Marcus. He made his adjustments with the precision of a surgeon. Elevation, windage, breathing, heartbeat, everything synchronized into a single moment of perfect clarity. The crowd had grown to over 100 soldiers now. Someone had even set up a camera to livestream to the rec hall where off-duty personnel watched on the big screen. Thornton stood at the front, his face pale, his fists clenched. His crew had gone silent. Colonel Hayes stood beside Captain Morrison. The colonel leaned over and whispered, "Where did you find this man?" Morrison shook her head slowly. "I didn't find him. I think we just inherited a legend." Marcus's finger rested on the trigger, applying no pressure yet. He waited. Wind was a living thing, breathing and shifting. You couldn't force it. You had to dance with it. His grandfather had taught him that. 3 seconds passed. 4, 5. Then the wind dropped, just for a heartbeat, and Marcus squeezed. The Lee Enfield roared. The recoil drove into his shoulder like a greeting from an old friend. The bullet traveled for what seemed like an eternity, crossing the impossible distance, fighting gravity and air resistance and every law of physics that said this shot couldn't be made with 70-year-old equipment and apple crates. The target exploded. The crowd went insane. Soldiers were screaming, jumping, throwing their caps in the air. Even the range officers were grinning, shaking their heads in disbelief. Morrison was laughing, actual tears streaming down her face. Marcus stood slowly, safing his rifle. He checked the timer. 38 minutes, 14 seconds. 5 minutes faster than Thornton. 7 targets. 7 shots. No misses. No second chances needed. He turned to face the crowd, his weathered face showing the faintest hint of a smile. Thornton stood frozen, his world crumbling around him. The golden boy had just been dethroned by a man with apple crates and a museum piece. Marcus lifted his grandfather's rifle in a quiet salute. Sometimes the old ways work just fine. The medal ceremony that evening felt surreal. Marcus stood on the platform in his dress uniform, the gold medal heavy around his neck, while camera flashes lit up the base auditorium. Colonel Hayes had insisted on a formal presentation, inviting local media and even the regional commander. Thornton stood in the third-place position, having been edged out of second by a Marine Corps sniper from Camp Pendleton. The lieutenant's face was a mask of controlled fury, but he shook Marcus's hand when protocol demanded it. His grip was weak, defeated. After the ceremony, Marcus found himself surrounded by soldiers wanting to know his secrets, asking about his training, requesting photos with him and his apple crates. The same people who had mocked him 48 hours ago now treated him like visiting royalty. Captain Morrison approached with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Marcus. "I owe you an apology. What I said at lunch about accepting humiliation, about old ways not working." Marcus took the coffee gratefully. "You were trying to protect me. I understand that. Still, I underestimated you. We all did." He smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "To be fair, I've spent my entire career being underestimated. You get used to it." A young private, barely 20, stepped forward nervously. "Sir, can I ask, how did you know you could make those shots? With that equipment against all those guys with their fancy gear?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I didn't know. Not for certain. But my grandfather carried this rifle through the worst war in human history. He made shots that kept his mates alive when everything else had failed. I figured if it was good enough for him in his worst moments, it was good enough for me in mine." The private nodded, something shifting in his expression. Understanding, maybe. Respect, certainly. Later that night, Marcus sat alone in his temporary quarters, cleaning his rifle one last time before packing. There was a knock on the door. When he opened it, Thornton stood there out of uniform, looking smaller somehow without his usual entourage. "I need to understand," Thornton said without preamble. "How?" Marcus stepped aside, letting him in. He gestured to the rifle on the bed. "You want the technical answer or the real one?" "Both." Marcus sat down. Technically, the Lee Enfield has one of the smoothest bolt actions ever made. It's accurate to distances that would surprise you. The apple crates provided stable elevation and absorbed recoil beautifully. The scope I mounted is old but perfectly calibrated. And the real answer? Marcus met his eyes. "I've taken shots where if I missed, good people died. I've fired in conditions where my equipment failed and all I had was training and instinct. Your hydraulic rest is impressive, Thornton. But it can break, can malfunction. What doesn't break is skill built over decades of doing this when it actually matters." Thornton was quiet for a long moment. Then he extended his hand, and this time the grip was firm. "Thank you for the lesson." Marcus shook it. "You're a good shooter. You just forgot that gear serves the shooter, not the other way around." 18 months later, Marcus Webb returned to Fort Bennet, this time not as a competitor but as an instructor. The British-American Marksmanship Exchange Program had been expanded, largely due to the viral video of his performance that had garnered over 12 million views worldwide. The clip of him making that final 1,200-yard shot with apple crates had become legendary in military circles, studied in academies from Quantico to Sandhurst. Colonel Hayes had personally requested his assignment. "We need someone to teach these kids that technology is a tool, not a crutch," she had written in her official request. "We need someone to remind them what fundamentals look like." The base had changed in small ways. The shooting range had a new plaque commemorating that day, with a photo of Marcus and his famous apple crates. Someone had preserved the actual crates, displaying them in a glass case in the base museum alongside his grandfather's rifle, on loan for the exhibit. Marcus walked into the classroom where 30 young snipers awaited their first lesson. Among them sat Derek Thornton, now a captain, who had voluntarily requested to retake advanced marksmanship training. When their eyes met, Thornton nodded with genuine respect. The transformation in Thornton had been remarkable. After that day, he had stripped away his reliance on expensive equipment, going back to basics, rebuilding his skills from the ground up. He had become, in many ways, a better shooter. More importantly, he had become a better leader, teaching his own squad that humility and fundamentals mattered more than the latest technology. "Good morning," Marcus began, setting his rifle case on the table. "Over the next 8 weeks, some of you are going to hate me. I'm going to make you shoot in conditions you think are impossible. I'm going to limit your equipment until you can make shots with nothing but iron sights and instinct. I'm going to push you until you understand that this," he tapped his temple, "is your primary weapon. Everything else is secondary." He opened the case, revealing his grandfather's Lee Enfield. A few students recognized it immediately, whispering to their neighbors, "My grandfather taught me that the weapon doesn't make the shooter. The shooter makes the weapon. Some of you have rifles that cost $20,000. That's fine. But if you can't make the shot without all the bells and whistles, then you're not a sniper. You're just someone with expensive equipment." He paused, looking at each face. "Now, who wants to learn how to actually shoot?" Every hand went up. After class, as students filed out, Marcus stood at the window overlooking the range where it had all happened. His phone buzzed. A message from his daughter back in England. "Just watched your video again, Dad. Showed it to James. He wants to join the army now because of his granddad. I told him you'd talk to him about it." Marcus smiled, typing back a response. As he did, Thornton approached. "Thank you," the captain said simply, "for coming back, for teaching us." Marcus pocketed his phone. "Sometimes the old ways need reminding. I'm just glad people are willing to listen." He picked up his rifle case and walked toward the door, leaving behind a room that smelled of gun oil and humility, where the next generation of shooters would learn that respect wasn't given. It was earned. One impossible shot at a time.